Hi, it's time for our next project in which we'll be preparing a simple slider. As you can see on the right hand side of your screen, we have 3 images which are taking turns in presenting itself, which is happening automatically at certain intervals alongside with the caption in the middle. We've got a first text, a second text, and the third text, which I know is very creative. And at the bottom we have those 3 dots, and the red frame indicates which of the slides is currently showing. Cool. This is it for our complete project. This is a new tab. This is what we'll be working on. And so nothing is changing, nothing is sliding because it's not quite ready. We have a little bit more than usually in our index HTML and CSS, or actually CSS. Let's just focus for a moment on the body tag. Everything is placed in the header here. Got a image tag. It's always just one because the path is gonna be changed by our function in JS. There's gonna be dynamically injected. Instead of this image 1, it's gonna be an image 2 and then image 3. And then we have our H1, which is the text, and in the div spans for 3 dots. That's it for index HTML. And for CSS, it's nothing special, and I don't think that at this point you're probably like more advanced, so it's just a tiny revision for you perhaps. And we have margin set to 0 on everything. Our header taking 100% of the space, so we can see it expanded on the whole screen. Position relative, so that our image, well, our image has position absolute twice. Image can be also and our text and our dots, they can be like absolute to the relative of a header. Everything centered, everything expanded. I'm not gonna go into detail here because, as I said, I think you probably know more than what is already in here. We have this pan active, but this is gonna be for the second part. So yes, let's move on to our main JS. And as far as our main JS is concerned, for now we've got nothing. We are going, however, we're going to create a slide list. I'm going to create const slide list, which is going to be an array of objects. I'm going to do this. And this is how we are going to store those 2 elements that are going to be changing on every change of a slide. So slide is changing and the text is changing, and this is going to be stored. Those 3 elements are going to be stored as objects in our array. So the first thing that we're going to need is an image. And here we are just storing the path that is going to be changing. So let's copy this. This is the path that is going to be dynamically injected by JS. So let's keep it here. And the second thing that we're going to need in our first object is the text. And text is just, let's say, first text. Cool. And the same thing will go for our second object and our third object. And this is not a dot here, but a comma. And we just need to update image 1 is okay, then image 2 and image 3 second text and the third text. Cool. So these are the elements that will be changing and taking, like as you can see, this is an array. And as we know, every array has index for every element. So this is index 0, index 1 for the second element, and index 2 for the third element. Well, this is going to be incremented and injected dynamically later on. So that's it for now. And we are going to create like 2 sections. So that's the first one is going to be an interface, and the second part is going to be us implementing our functions. So it's like things. Interface is responsible for like the things that maybe perhaps your customer would like to change. So for instance, it will say, okay, I want to change this image every 3 seconds. Then he comes in or she comes in and she says, well, I do not want 3 seconds anymore. This is too quick. I want 10 seconds. And so it's very easy to just get inside the interface and change those things. Whereas the implementation should be universal. So it should work for, like, for instance, if you add 50 more images, it should still work exactly the same. And the customer comes in and says, oh, I want to know 100 images. And so you're adding all those 100 images, but the implementation doesn't need to be changed because it's universal. Interface is like the API for communication and changing those key things. So let's kind of introduce this division between interface and implementation. And in the implementation, we probably will need, since we want the images and the captions change at certain intervals, so every some time, we probably are going to need a setInterval function. And the first parameter is our callback function. It's going to be change slide function, which we are going to write in just a second. And we wanted to change every, let's say, 5 seconds. So this is going to be placed here. Whereas I already want to specify the time. And I want to set it to, let's say 5,000 milliseconds with 5 seconds. So instead of those 5,000 here, we are going to put time. So later on, we don't need to interfere with the implementation. We're just going to get here in the interface like, okay, now 3 seconds, no problem. 3,000 milliseconds. Cool. Since I'm just gonna create a function declaration, I will change slides, assign an arrow function to it. Whoops. Save it. There's one thing we know for certain, that we want to be able to get access to the index of each of those elements. And as our common sense at this point should suggest, we should probably store it in a variable. So I'm going to create a const called active. And for now, I'm just going to give it a value of 0. So we are kind of like at this 0 index element here. And what we need our function change slide to do, we need to increment that number every time. As soon as we open the page, we are already on index 0 because this is like hard coded in here. So this page is not empty, but there's always something there. And only once everything has been uploaded, our script tag is going to be executing whatever is in our main.js. So in change slide, we will do active plus plus, incrementing our index of every element. And that's okay that it starts from 0, because then as soon as we're gonna trigger the setInterval function is gonna be triggered, our change slide function is gonna be triggered, and then the active, meaning the index, is gonna be incremented to 1, and the image is gonna change to the position 1. This is index 1, and so the image 2 is gonna be uploaded. Cool. And we have to think what we need to happen. What we need to happen is to inject the new path to be injected to our image here. And we also need a new text to be injected here. So we need to store those two elements to be able to kind of access them and change their properties. So here at the top, I'm going to create a const image and do a document query selector. We don't have to do query selector all because we only have one image. And we are selecting the tag from the index.html and not actually the images from our folder. So we will do image, and our image had a class of slider. So we do image with a class of slider, and we will also create our h1, also a document query selector, and that was h1 with also class of slider. So now we are storing those two elements, and we can feel free to change the properties. So what we need to do, we need to get inside our image, and here we could do a class list or class name, any property that we wanted, but we want to access the source, our source, and have a new image source added every time. How do we do it? Well, basically, first of all, in essence, we need to get to the slide list here, and then obviously we know that since active is changing, this has to be a universal index. So every time it's going to be a new index, not the same index. We cannot place 0 or whatever we wanted. We need to place this active here. And once we have a specific, this way we are getting inside our specified element, which is an object. And once we are inside, we can be even more specific as to what key we want to be able to access, or actually accessing the value of that key. So here we want to get inside the image. So this is what we're going to place here, image, and cool. This is going to do the job for us. And the other thing that we wanted to change was h1, and as per usual, we've done it so many times that we know it's text content property. And again, we want to get inside the slide list. We need to update the same index, and so we have to paste it here. And here, after the dot, instead of getting to an image, we need to be able to access the text. Right. Let's see if there are any errors in the console. Assignment to constant variable. Wow, that is definitely not good, since we want to be able to increment active, and I've placed const. This is not possible to use const here. We have to go with let. And the console will always tell you the truth. You think you're so smart, and then bam, you put const active. Now we have no errors, and that is amazing, but we can also see that our slider is working. It's changing. Let's put, instead of 5,000 milliseconds, let's go to 3 because we don't have the whole time in the world. Boom, boom, boom. And there is a cannot read properties of undefined reading image and change slide. So something is wrong with our change slide and it cannot read the property of SAM image. And this is because our active is incrementing, but we only have 3 elements. So as soon as it hits the 4th one, which it doesn't exist, it cannot read its property image because it's not there. So as per usual, we need to create a condition for this kind of circumstances. We need to make sure that there is an if statement, and inside the if statement we say that if active reaches the slide list length, we do not want to go to the next element, but we actually want to reset active to 0. Do you understand what happened here? So active is incremented. It starts from 0. This is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So, and the slide list length is 3. So if active hits 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, third one is the non-existent one, and as soon as it hits 3, it should go back to being 0. And it's a universal thing because we do not hard coding it how many elements our array has. We can add those 100 more images and it's still gonna take the slide list length. So it's gonna be going as long as it's gonna find new elements in our array. As many objects we would place there, it would still work just fine. Right. Is there anything else here I wanted to show you? This is the easy part because it's just a slider and working with the things that we've already kind of got familiar with. Maybe this is slightly new. It's also necessary for us to be able to get inside and understand how the array works and why these are objects. I think this would look much nicer if we place it on the next line. See if, there we go. Nice. Cool, so in the second part and the next part, we'll make sure that the red dot or the red frame is moving along with every slide and it has to be at the same time. I will see you in just a second working on those red dots. In this part right here, we are taking care of our dots, meaning that as soon as a new slide comes in and the new text, we want that red frame to move on to the next dot and then to the next one and then go back to position 0 and so on and so on. And we want all of this to happen at the same time. And the first thing that comes to mind is to create another setInterval new function. Instead of change slide, now change dot and set the time to also 3000 milliseconds, which would be 3 seconds. And the same time goes in this setInterval and in the second setInterval. And then what one thing left to do would be to implement our new function, change dot. But it would be some sort of solution, but it wouldn't be the most optimal and the best solution. There's something better and much easier that we can do. And this is, instead of creating another set interval, because even though it is supposed to be triggered as soon as the page is loaded and at the same time, so at the same interval, there's still a risk or a possibility that there is going to be this tiny, teeny difference in time. So this will be triggered first, and then there's like a mini tiny fraction of a second change dot later on. And so to avoid this from ever happening and implement much easier solution, we are going to call our change dot function right here in change slide. So instead of using two set intervals and risking that it's gonna be not this simultaneous as we want, we are going to make sure that this one set interval from here is taking care of everything. So the change slides now is not only changing the slides, but also calling change dot function. So the one thing left to do is to implement the body of our change dot function. So as a default at the beginning, as soon as the web page is loaded, we have the first image as an image that has been loaded as a header, and the class active, which gives that red frame. You can see it here. It makes the red frame for our dot here is set on the first span. And that's the perfect default starting situation, because we need some picture to be loaded and that red frame here. Then we want to get rid of it and make sure that every time a new index gets it, like the correct index, the dot with the correct index gets that red frame. So the first thing we need to do is to kind of get rid of this one. We could use a for each here as we did before and reset them all, get rid of any red frame, and then give the class of red active frame again to the correct element. But instead, I want to introduce a new method called findIndex. Before we get to our findIndex method, we need our dots. We need to store them somewhere because we'll need access to them. I'm going to create a const called dot, then document query selector all this time because there's more than one dot. In fact, 3 spans, and they are being stored in our div with the class of dot, and there are 3 spans. Here we are injecting our dot. Cool. So what I'm gonna do, dot for a class, dot is the name of the class, and we want to collect all available spans in that class. And one thing I need to show you right away is that dot is currently a node list with 3 elements. And if you remember correctly, a node list is a pseudo array object, which is not an actual array, which means that it doesn't have access to as many methods. And findIndex is one of those methods that is not available to elements if you use query selector all. So what we need to use an array notation and transform our pseudo array, our node list, into an actual array. We will use the square bracket and the rest operator here. And now our dot should be transformed and it is an actual array now. And now we can get to the real thing, the most important thing, which is the implementation of our change dot function. As with all of those methods for array, we need to work on an element. We are going to take our array dot. We are going to type find index. And find index is taking a callback function. So I'm going to do an arrow function. Here we need to specify the element that we are working on, which is a single dot. If we're only working on one element, we don't need those brackets around. We just say dot, and the next part of the statement is what is being returned as our condition. So we want to find out which of the spans has a class of active. So we do a dot class list and contains for checking if there is our particular class of active. And also this active is different from this active here. This active is our class that we created in CSS, and this active here is the indication of an index for changing the slides. Cool. So dot class list contains active, and this works this way, that it's going to return true for only one element, and this specified element will give us the information what index it is, and find index will only return the specified number, so it will return the index. We can check what I'm talking about straight away. I'm just gonna slightly bigger. Okay, we have dot find index, and we are finding it at index 0. By default, the first span has been given the class active, and if we move this class active, instead of at index 0, we will give it to the last one here. I'm gonna save it and again retrieve the information. You can see that the index here has changed and it's now showing 2 because our ID 012, so here is the index 2 of that particular dot. It has the class of active. Cool. I'm just gonna move it back because we want at the start of the program for our first dot to be red. And let's go back to main. Okay, so this is how the arrow function works here, that it's returning a particular index. And this index we can assign as a value to a new const. So we are going to do const. Let's say, how we can call it? We are going to call it an active dot, and this is going to be the new value for active dot, its index. And then once we know that we have that correct index, we can get rid of this red frame. So what we will do, again, we will work on the dot array that contains all 3 spans, all 3 dots, and we will do access the class list, and instead of checking if it has it, we are going to use the remove method. And again, we are going to specify that we want to get rid of the active class. Here I left it empty. So what do we need here is an index, because we need to tell the program which of the dot we want to deprive of active class. And it is being stored here now because we checked. And this way, the correct dot will be rid of the red frame. I'm gonna save it. And you can see that the next element, it doesn't have it because we only took it away, but we never gave it back. We need to make sure that we take from the one that doesn't need it, but we also need to make sure that the one that is in order has it again. So what we do is dot. Again, here, no more active dot, but we're actually using this active. So here, active, and then class list. Rather than removing, we need to add now. And again, we're working with active class. Save it, and let's check if our program works. Cool. Third text, first dot, second text, second dot, and the third text gets the third dot. And as I said, there are many different ways to achieve the same result. We could do a for each, then reset the red frame for all of them, and then give it to, like we did to the last one and the line of 28 to the one that needs it because it has a correct index here. But I wanted to show you something new, and the find index is a very nice method, very useful. So it's always good to know something new. The next part is going to be an assignment for you. So far we've done some simple stuff. I think the third part is actually the most complicated and it requires the most of thinking. But anyway, everything that you do for the first time seems difficult, so I invite you to watch the next video. Finally, something for you. I know you love when there is an assignment, so here it is. It's exactly the same thing, at least on the surface, because we're actually adding some more features. So basically, it's not only now automatically changing slider at a given break, introducing a new slide, but instead now we can interfere. So we can press the right arrow key or the left arrow key and we can fast forward or we can move backwards at any given speed, and it's just updating, but we're doing it manually, pressing on the key. Cool. So let's have a look at the instructions. We've got the left arrow key that moves the slider to the left, moving backwards, and we have the right arrow key that moves the slider to the right, forward. And it is exactly the same thing, so we need to take care of the same elements. So updating the slide, the image, updating the caption here in the middle, and updating the red frame around the dot here. It's just going to be a little bit more complicated this time because here, instead of just incrementing the index, we need to make sure that we are taking care of also decrementing the index and resetting it. Instead of only resetting it to 0 position, once we get here, we need to make sure that it goes back to the last element. Cool. We have a mini helpful indication that there is a property on the event object that is called key code, and the left arrow key code is 37 and the right arrow key code is 39. Something to work with in our function. And also this is relatively easy. I'll say that this is something that you probably will manage. And here is some troubling part because you need to make sure that when we interfere with our slider, it will pause our set interval and it will be restarted. So it's going to restart after changing of the slide, and the countdown has to start over. So if we interfere and I'm going to change to the third slide, it has to reset the time and start counting again the 3 seconds before it fires the change slide function. The set interval is responsible for firing the same function every 3 seconds, and it has to start over. So we cannot have a situation that I'm going to press the right arrow key and immediately afterwards our set interval will come into action as well, changing it immediately afterward. There has to be this break of 3 seconds. Cool. Next, we're listening for a key down event on the window object, and when this happens, we have a key change slide function that is supposed to be triggered, and we have to create this function, the body of this function, but there is also a change required outside of the function. I say it may also require, it depends on how you approach this task, because there are a million ways to do the same thing, but the one that I'm kind of like envisioning for you that you will decide upon is requiring to introduce some changes outside of this function as well. Cool. So I wish you good luck, and before watching the next video, sit down and try to work this out. Cool. Thanks. If you managed, amazing, and congratulations. If you didn't, however, I would say let's do it together now. Watch carefully, memorize as much as possible, and I don't mean lines of code, but actual thinking process of how we got there, step by step, and then come back to it later on. I mean, take some time off the project and then come back to it later on to do it on your own. Because in programming, it's really, you can really say that you really can do something if you can really do it on your own. Copy paste, following the tutorials is like, it's a necessary step in learning process, but later on, if you want to be able to really own it, you need to be able to do it on your own. So I hope this wasn't upsetting or like insulting. It's just how it is. So that said, let's focus on the task at hand, which is to handle this key change slide function here. This is supposed to be triggered on a key down event that we're listening for on the window object. I'm just going to make here a mini commentary, so it's keys, so we know that the next part of the code is devoted to keys handling. I'm going to create a const called key change slide arrow function. And inside here, the first thing we are going to do, we are going to a console log. And what do we want to console log? In the instruction, we had information that the left arrow key has a key code of 37 and the right arrow key has a key code of 39. In fact, every key on our keyboard has its allocated key code number. So if we hit any key on the keyboard, it returns a number. I'm going to pass E here for event object, and in this case we can nicely access its property inside here. So we do a E key code. That's it. And now I'm going to save it and go to the web page Now, as soon as I hit any key, we can see a new number printed in the console, meaning everything works as intended. We're listening for every key down event. But the thing is, we don't want to listen for any key down event. We want to listen for very specific key down event, which is 37 with the key code of 37, the left arrow key, and the right arrow key with the key code of 39. I'm going to press 37 on the left arrow key, so this would also be correct. And only then we want to change those slides. So what we need to do, I'm going to remove that console log from here and create a conditional statement. So if the E key code equals 37, or if the E key code equals 39. Oh, only in those two events. So only for the left arrow key and the right arrow key we want things to happen. So, and now, what exactly do we want to happen if we press that left arrow key or the right arrow key? We want to force a new slide, new caption, and we want that red frame to go to the next dot or go backwards, depending on whether we press forward or backwards. And if we are unsure how to proceed, we can have a look at this change slide function here, which was very similar. And the first thing that it was handling, it was the incrementation of index. And here it's going to be slightly more complicated because we're handling moving forward, but we're also handling moving backwards. I'm going to use an ternary operator, which is very neat, very transparent, and you'll see it a lot because it's very popular. So the first argument is if the key code equals 37. So if we pressed left arrow key and a question mark, what do we want to happen? We want to do something with our index active, but we don't want to go forward because the left arrow key moves it backwards. So we want to decrement our active. In case it wasn't 37 that we clicked, our condition here is already limiting us to two options. It can be either 37 or 39, meaning if it wasn't 37, it had to be the right arrow key 39. And in this case, we want to active to go higher. We want to increment active. So this is our index handled nicely. Save it. And the only problem here is that we can increment and decrement forever, and it will go on as long as, I don't know, indefinitely, but we only have 3 elements in our slide list array. We should be only able to access index 0, index 1, and index 2. Anything else will throw an error. So basically, what is supposed to do, our function is supposed to force a new slide, new caption, and take care of that red dot here. So I'm just going to copy the entire thing from our previous function and paste it in here. And let's see how this is handled. So here we are injecting a new image, and the active is the same active as in here because it's declared in the global scope here on the line 27. And we can use the same lines of code because we're supposed to handle the same thing. We want to inject a new image. Active is the index that we are taking off in here, and we want to be able to inject a new text. Active is the index that is taken care of here, And we also want to take care of that red frame around our dot, which is taken care of by our change dot function. I'm gonna save it now, and you see that I can go forward and backward. Our set interval is already like taking place there, so it's happening way too quickly. But at some point, if I want to go backwards too many times or forward too many times, it's been incremented so many times or decremented so many times, it's trying to access an element in the array that doesn't exist. Because if I press 12 times, I'm going to increment 12 times, and it's going to try to access the element at specified index way forward, which is not possible because there isn't anything. So we want to make sure, as we did previously in our change slide function, that as soon as index is going to reach the end of our array, it's going to be reset to 0. So again, we can copy this thing from our previous function and paste it here. If index equals the end of the list, reset active to 0. Let's save it and let's see how this works. So we can move, now we can nicely move forward, and after reaching the last element, it's going back to index 0. That is great, but if we go backwards, still the same thing is happening. It's throwing an error because it cannot read that property because it goes to minus 26 and there's nothing there. So we need to make sure that as soon as it reaches the index 0 here, it goes to the end of our array. And how do we do it? We say else if, and else if active is less than 0. Yes, because 0 is still okay, but if it reaches, index reaches -1, then we want it to go back. Instead of reading something that doesn't exist, we want it to go back to the last element here. So if it's less than 0, we want active to equal in its slide list length -1. It has been discussed in the theory class when we were talking about arrays and methods for arrays. If you do -1, this is as accessing the end of this is the last element of our slide list, because it's going to provide the correct index. So I'm going to save it and see how this turns out. We know that we can go forward, but we can now also go backwards. So it may have seemed a little complicated, but this was actually the easiest part of our task, and now is the tricky part. Because as you can see, I'm pressing, and sometimes there is this break between the new, like getting the new slide on, but often it just, the set interval comes into action, and as soon as I change the slide, the set interval changes it again. And correct slider should not work like this. It should be every time the set interval should be reset. So if I interfere and I hit the right arrow key and I force a new slide on, it should reset the countdown of the set interval and wait again the specified time, which is, in our case, it's 3 seconds. So after I change the slide, the set interval should be initiated after 3 seconds and not immediately, meaning that we actually need to stop our set interval from executing for when we interfere with our slider. How do we do it? We now know that this every set interval has its own index. So we're going to give our set interval, we're going to assign this value of this index to a new variable. I'm going to create index interval, and we have now this index stored here. So what we can do is as soon as we trigger our function, because the correct key has been pressed on, we can access this index interval and actually wrap it in the parentheses because we are using the clear interval method. So we're going to do a clear interval, and in the parentheses we are passing the value, so the number of the index for our set interval. This should clear our set interval. And then what we want to do after the change dot, we want, actually let's check how this works at this given time. So I'm gonna interfere, we wait, and nothing is happening because we need to switch the set interval again. So we need to make sure this works again. So after the change dot here, we're gonna do set interval again and just copy the entire thing from here because we just want to initialize it again. I'm gonna save it and I'm gonna interfere. I'm gonna press left and the right arrow key, and you can see that something went terribly wrong because it seems it's going crazy now. It's changing the slides all the time, and it is because what happened here in fact wasn't as reinitiating the same set interval. So this interval works for the change slide function that is supposed to be happening automatically. Then we cleared that set interval using the clear interval function, and here this is not the same set interval. It looks the same, the words are the same, it does the same thing, but it's completely different function. So we're no longer reinitiating the same set interval, but instead we are creating a new one. So technically, or in practice as well, anytime we press 37 or 39 and we enter the body of the function here, we are initializing new set interval. So as many times as I press the right arrow key or the left arrow key, this many times we start a new set interval, and that's why it is going crazy. So instead, we would have to make sure that the program knows this is exactly same set interval. And how do we do it? We take the value from here and we update it. And for now, let's check if it works and if we see anything wrong. And straight away we can see that assignment to constant variable at key change slide. This is impossible because we used a const here. And what we need to do, we need to change it to a let instead. Save it, and now it should work absolutely fine. I'm gonna go. You can see that our set interval is changing the slides without me interfering. And I'm gonna interfere now. We can go forward, we can go backwards. It's always resetting the index in the correct direction. And now when I stop pressing, we wait 3 seconds, and only then set interval is triggered or reinitialized, because now we are working on the same set interval function, not creating a new one. Cool. I know this task wasn't like the easiest one. This is something that if you didn't know that there were key codes and how to work with those, then definitely very difficult. Then the ternary operator, you could have used a different normal if statement. That's also okay. It's just this notation is something that you will see a lot, so it's good to understand it when you see it. This is just copy paste from our previous function. Just needed to add a condition what is supposed to happen if we reach the other end of the index, and we needed to reset to the other side. This again, copy paste, and a little bit of thinking required for the set interval, because we know that every set interval has its index. So in order to stop the set interval from executing, we need to clear that index. But if we want to reinitialize the same thing, we need to make sure that we work with let, because const will not allow any reinitializing with the new value. And we don't want to create a new set interval, but we want to work with the same set interval throughout our working application. So this is it for now, and I'll see you at project 7 or 10. Well, see you there.